Hello and welcome to this episode of the Lancet Pulse. I'm your host, Chloe Wilson, and today I'm joined by Alex Loupy, who's the director of the Paris Institute of Transplantation and Organ Regeneration, to talk about xenotransplantation. And then I'm joined by Matthew Gilbert and Rebecca Park, who are two of our editors from the Lancet, to have a wider discussion about what we as editors think about xenotransplantation. Hope you enjoy. Hello there. So I am joined by Alex Loupy, who is an expert in transplantation. So what we're going to be talking about today is xenotransplantation. And Alex is a bit of an expert in that. So we're hoping he's going to give us some insight into what you need to know about it. So Alex, for our audience who perhaps don't know so much about xenotransplantation, can you give us, a brief history explaining, well, what exactly is xenotransplantation and where is the field at the moment?
Yes, indeed. We are experiencing a very key period. Obviously, xenotransplantation has not started a few decades ago. You probably have seen in ancient Greece these paintings of humans with body parts from animals. So it has been always in people's mind. But if we talk about xenotransplantation, is how someone receives an organ from a different species. There is a considerable history on that, starting in the 60s, where there were some experiments done in monkeys to humans. Then baby Faye in the early 90s, which was a baby which received a heart from a chimpanzees, and unfortunately it didn't last long. So that was the 90s of the xeno. And then we had the dark ages of xeno, because xeno provided in the 90s a lot of hope. Unfortunately, due to the immunological barrier between species and the consequences of hyperacute rejection after the 90s, xeno was not pushed so hard. Until we had the technological trigger, CRISPR-Cas9, with the ability to modify the pig genome, was a big technological disruption, which actually pushed xenotransplantation from experimental, and we're going to cover that, to a clinical reality. So if you talk about the recent landscape in the past 2 years, there have been several landmark operations in the United States and also more recently in China, including pig, kidney, and heart, lung, and liver transplants into humans. Most of these were compassionate use procedures for patients with no other options, but they have shown that xeno organ can function now for weeks or even months and maybe years in people, which is a real huge step forward.
And where have these transplants been done? So what are the countries that have been kind of leading the way in xenotransplantation, and where they've done some of these, kidney, heart, lung transplants?
Yes. So what are the most promising developments? Actually, United States and China are leading the field, and we're going to maybe talk about that later on. But Europe is very behind in xenotransplant due to regulations. The most exciting progress has come from genetically engineered pigs, whose organs were designed to avoid immune rejection and prevent cross-species infections as well. And the first key research paper came out in 2021 from NYU Langone and University of Maryland, and more recently Harvard Medical School, Mass General Hospitals, which have performed kidney and heart xenotransplantation in dissident or, and more recently, in living human. These procedures have shown that the pig kidneys and heart can work safely in these humans and also for extended periods. Let's talk about first like few minutes and hours, and now people are living with a kidney, functioning kidney, xeno kidney, now for 7 months in the Mass General Hospital patient. So another major development also in xenotransplantation is not the pig engineering itself and the way patients are managed, but also the use of artificial intelligence and molecular diagnostic tools to better predict the compatibility between pig and human immune systems.
I see. And in terms of the progress, I've got two things that I want to follow up with on that. But starting with the first, why is it the kidneys and the heart then that there's been the most progress out of all of the organs? Or is that too much of a complicated question?
No, of course. Kidney and heart were the first candidates. First of all, kidney and hearts behave quite the same in allo immune rejection. So I think in xeno immune rejection, it was very natural to start with kidney and heart. Heart was, in a way, more straightforward because the heart transplantation is really immediate life-saving procedures that patients, as the compassionate use, had no other option to die soon. For kidney, it was a little bit different. Also, patients who had no options to get a kidney transplant, who were on the waiting list, highly sensitized, and sometimes with no vascular access for dialysis. Regarding liver, it's a bit more complicated because liver is an organ that has a double circulation stream and it's used as a bridge, meaning that the liver is used to sustain liver function for a certain amount of time. So it was less suited for living persons because it needed to be tested first in patients cerebral death. And for lung, it's a very complicated organ. There is to date only one single report from China, which experienced acute rejection. So I think those organs are less likely. And we need to talk about also about cells, islets. Is also a very promising feature in xenotransplantation to cure patients with diabetes.
Well, I mean, before we talk any more about these points, tell me a little bit more about the progress that's being made on islet cells in diabetes then, because I do think it's such an exciting area. I mean, I'd seen some studies where they were looking at the 3D printing, but what sort of progress has been made with the islet cells in
of course, islet cells will be a complete game changer for treating patients with diabetes. And if we talk about xeno is going to be for sure one of the biggest medical breakthroughs of the 21st century. We have an organ shortage, and that's true for all organs. We cannot supply the demand of organ worldwide. There is not a single country around the world which can sustain that. And the number of patients with terminal organ failure, kidney, heart, lung, liver, but also pancreas, are increasing worldwide due to the consequences of hypertension, diabetes, and all these like comorbidities which are expanding worldwide. So xenotransplantation, if we talk about islets or organs, could be an unlimited source of organ supply, which can ultimately solve the organ shortage. And for the islets, it's very interesting how islets from pig pancreas, with the right immunosuppressive drug and with the right gene modifications to make the pig as compatible as we can to humans, could leverage so much for patients with diabetes. Regarding the question about gene-edited organs or bioengineered organs, I think it's not there yet. There have been tremendous progress on bioengineered organs, but we are talking more about a longer-term achievement, while, to my point, xeno will come as the new and the clinical trials just started to not to be a standard of care, but to be one of the possibilities for patients which have terminal organ failure. So it's not mutually exclusive with allo. Xenotransplantation will be another option for specific targeted populations and specific programs which can obviously afford to do xenotransplant.
And I mean, in terms of, you said that xeno you think is going to be the big breakthrough of the 21st century. But what's changed in terms of the xenotransplantation landscape compared to where we started, in the 60s? So what are those really promising developments and some of those really notable papers?
So, in all medical discovery, we have a technological trigger, then we have a peak of inflated expectations, some disillusionment, and then the plateau of productivity. And that was in the 90s where there was a disillusionment because of the rejection process, because the biggest challenge in xeno is still the immune system. So the breakthrough was 2012, the discovery of these gene editing capabilities with the CRISPR-Cas9 technology, which allowed unlimited possibilities to have this genetic engineering. And because the human body can recognize a pig organ as foreign and attack it, the possibility to insert human transgene or to knock out for specific genes which are recognized by our immune system was the breakthrough which made xenotransplantation not only last for hours, but now few months. The other big breakthrough has been toward new diagnostic tools and also with the availability of targeted immunosuppressive regimens that we learned are very potent to block, for example, the complement cascade or to block the NK cells. So all these drugs in our armamentarium were also used in a way to block the immune system and to prevent this rejection process.
Thank you. I mean, that's really helpful. And for anyone who wants to read a bit more about those breakthroughs, I mean, what would you say the top 2 or 3 papers that are notable and that anyone should read on xenotransplantation?
So if I had to quote 3 papers, of course, the 2021 first 2 dissident kidney transplantations performed by the team of NYU in the New England Journal of Medicine was the major breakthrough. And then the accompanying paper afterwards on the living heart person, also published in the New England Journal of Medicine. Lancet has also published a landmark paper, which I have the privilege to be part of with the team of NYU, where we describe the complete landscape of pig to human xenoimmune rejection. Because despite the fact that those organs were functioning, we were able with new tools to see that there was an architecture of xenoimmune response due to the presence of antibodies that the human produces against the xenoantigens. And I think the recognition of this entity was very important because now it's translated to heart. We see these problems also in liver and lung. So it's a universal kind of picture that those organs present immune injuries. So we are not there yet. There must be some new progress. And that paper in Lancet was very landmark and key to recognize and push, the medical field towards characterizing this immune response to find the operational biological pathway that we could first target with specific drugs. And point number 2, come back to the pig farms, which does do genetically modified pigs, to help them to define what are the next genetic modifications needed to make this pig even more compatible to humans.
Yeah. So in simple terms, I mean, that leads me on to my next question about, well, what's stopping us then in terms of xenotransplantation currently? I mean, what are the barriers that we need to overcome in order to make it, a possibility?
I would say that there are 4 main barriers in which we need to make progress. The first one, which I covered, is still that the main limitation is the immune system. We've seen immune injuries in 100% of the xenotransplant performed, no matter what type of pig was used, no matter what was the condition or the immunosuppressive drugs. So I think we need to better understand the long-term function and how the immune system reacts to these genetically modified organs. And we need to develop very specific and precision diagnostic tool to characterize and make the right diagnosis. And this is where actually the International Xenotransplant Society and the BANF International Rejection Classification are moving. So big step, limitation, xenoimmune response. There are also, some limitations in Europe, which are ethical and regulatory. In Europe now there is almost no research done on xeno except one team in Munich. So all the fundings have dropped since the early 2000s. And we do have still a regulation which was established in 1999. Which actually prevents Europe from doing xenotransplantation. So that regulatory barrier for the implementation of xeno, especially in Europe, is so important. So there are different groups and stakeholders now working with patients to change this legislation to allow not only research, but xenotransplantations to be performed in Europe, and then we can reboot these programs.
I didn't know about that, actually, the legislation from 1999.
Yeah, the European legislation currently prevents Europe from being competitive on xeno. It's an unmet need, and we need to be aware. And that's very important for us that the Lancet, which is a very global journal, but European-based, advocates for xenotransplant research from different teams, because we need Europe to be recognized as one of the potential, key player in xenotransplantation. So for that, we need to change the regulation, and it's a very important unmet need.
And I'm sorry, I know I've interrupted your train of thought, but I'm just really curious. I mean, on that regulation aspect, so what? Because I don't know much about it. So it was brought in late 90s, but
yes,
specifically, does it say, is it because of the ethical aspects or?
It was, no, that's very important. So Europe in 1999 decided to stop the Xeno program because of the fear of safety concerns. Of course, the Xeno are managed carefully in the US and in China, but the main worry was the cross-species infections, meaning a virus from the pigs jumping to humans. So today, the peak use for xenotransplantation are raised in completely biosecure, virus-free environments, and their genomes are also screened to remove potentially risky sequences. So I think that safety with the technology is also now more a reality. But Europe is still stuck in the late 90s. We call it principe de précaution in French, but to be precautious on this safety concern. And Chloe, that was the main reason why Europe put the Xeno programs on hold. But, as I said, those safety concerns now, and if you add to these safety concerns the fact that now it's with the careful monitoring and different conditions, there has been no concerns on, cross-species virus transmission. I think we are in where we can master the risk nowadays better than we were in the end of the 90s.
And I suppose that now we have a basis. So in, the US and China, who are doing a lot of this work on xenotransplantation. So that hasn't been a concern in terms of the safety from anything that's come out of those studies or, the ongoing research.
Yeah, I think you raised a very important point. And as a journal, I think, how the policies and the approvals and the ethicals and the ethics and regulatory has been approved, especially in countries where we, there are some questions about these points. It needs to be a mandatory step in any publication on Xeno to make sure that this has been approved by regulatory health authorities and that all ethics have been also improved, consent, fair access, animal welfare. All these points are mandatory. We know that most programs follow a very strict ethical oversight, also ensuring that the animal use is minimized, justified, and also that the human participants are fully informed. And in case of dissident, that these dissident brain deaths are following, very specific rules. And also, so I think that that's a very key point. So that was my point number 3. I had immune system, regulatory, safety concerns. Also, I think we have also a discussion about, as I was mentioning, about ethical issues as well. There is a growing, Chloe, discussion in Xeno about equity, making sure these technologies can benefit to patients worldwide, not just a few. There are also open questions regarding the price and how the pig farms will put a price tag on these procedures. What is the burden of immunosuppressive drugs that will be given to patients waiting for the next generation pig to allow lighter immunosuppressive drugs for patients? And so it's also a very important point when Xeno pops up. And also not to talk about the questions about religion and the barriers and the cultural barriers around the use of pig. As you know, the pig cardiac valves are already in use, and there are some pig-derived products which are used to treat patients. So from all the discussion we had with representatives from the different religions, there is no contraindication. I mean, from the religion standpoint, that it's forbidden, because when it's life-saving, actually these rules can not apply. But as a cultural matter, I think we need also to inform better the population, and also we have the patient advocate, which can play a role. So these are, to me, the key pillars that needs to be worked to make xeno a reality for becoming a new standard of care.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very interesting because there are obviously still many biological and scientific hurdles to overcome, but there's also these aspects, as you said, that are very cultural, that are around ethics. So it does feel like a very big challenge to see, that xenotransplantation, how it's going to move forward, over the next 50 years or so. Because there was something I wanted to discuss on that ethical aspect, because I do think it's a very big challenge at the moment, because, there obviously is research ongoing, but at the moment, the people that are involved in the research are those where it's being used on a compassionate use basis. So it's where there are no other options, which I do think is very challenging ethical ground.
Yes, of course. I mean, I will say that ethics at the heart, if I can speak like that, of xenotransplantation. I mean, whenever you talk, and that's why, xenotransplantation has so much interest, I think, beyond the medical field. When the first xeno paper were released, I mean, the mainstream media coverage worldwide was huge, because whenever you talk about transplanting organs from animal to humans, we're not just talking about science, right? We are talking about values, respect for life. We are talking also about responsibility. When I talk about xeno, people often ask the same questions. Animal welfare. Are the pig used for xenotransplantation raised in highly controlled, with humane environment? Are they specifically bred for medical research? Is there control oversight to ensure their care, minimize suffering? So this is very similar to animals are used in producing life-saving medicines, like I said, insulin or heart valves. But that's really a question that I have like 100% of time when I talk about xeno outside of the medical field. Of course, you have also another point is human safety, because patients, they say, oh, what is my safety? Would I sign or opt in for getting a xeno? Are we advanced in a way that it's safe for me, that it protects me, that prevents me as a patient for any risk of infection? And it's also about the fully information before participating in xenotransplant study. So that's another very important point. And the last one that I would like to mention is also the societal acceptance. As we mentioned, the different cultures, religion, they have, very different views on using animal organs. So it's very important. And I think the field and the transplant society are really pushing towards to listen and also involve patients, ethicists, and also the public for really advancing into a more like transparent and respectful way. I think this is very key if we want those ethical consideration to be, transparently reported and as we move forward.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot to think about, isn't there, with xenotransplantation? It's certainly not going to be a completely straightforward journey, I think. I mean, so how do you envision a xenotransplantation service kind of working? Because I imagine it would be alongside, allotransplantation. And as you said, there's many, many problems within the current organ transplantation service. We have a shortage of organs, and we have a really high demand and a high need. So how do you see xenotransplantation, if we get over some of those barriers? How do you see it working?
It's the question on how will xenotransplantation fit within the current transplant system, which is called the standard of care. And we know that standard of care of allotransplantation is not perfect. There is no perfect standard of care in medicine. There is organ shortage, for example. People still suffer from rejection and complication from immunosuppressive drugs, long-term consequences, cardiovascular disease, infections, and cancer. And the organs do not last forever, so they need to be retransplanted. So that's currently the standard of care. Allotransplantation, it's about 150,000 allotransplant performed around the world, globally, every year. 1.5 million people around the world who live with an organ transplant. But we know that there are many on the waiting list. And before the waiting list, there are many patients with end-stage renal failure, which are never referred to the waiting list. So there is a big, huge funnel, to be a candidate and to be elected, to get a transplant. So allotransplantation is the standard of care. And I think what we must not see is a competition between allo and xenotransplantation. They are absolutely not mutually exclusive. Xenotransplantation will not replace human donation. It will complement it. As the goal is to end the shortage of organ, and if we can ensure that patients who need a transplant get one without waiting months, years, or decades, we might see a hybrid system, human organ first, and then xeno organ as a safe, potentially bridge alternative to wait or to get an allo if you have to wait and you have projected to wait for 10 years for a compatible graft. So this is how I see the transplant programs with complementary and different options, but not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, I can understand that. And going forward then, what are the future developments that we should be keeping our eye on? We've talked a little bit about the regulatory barriers and the ethical barriers, but what's happening within that space to try and overcome some of those barriers? What are the next big things that are already in the works?
Yeah, so to me, there are, I would say there are three big key innovations which will drive success. And we have kind of covered some of them, but better genetic editing. The current pigs are good. They are amazing with the technology which has been used, moving for, one single knockout to knockout for 3 different genes and 10 gene modification. And there are models which are now doing other gene modifications to make the pig organs even more human compatible. So better genetic editing. The second pillar will be immune tolerance strategy to help the human body to accept the organ long term. And for having this immune tolerance strategy will be to use different drugs at different time points in a very pathogenesis-driven, mechanistically driven manner, so we can use the right drug at the right moment to block some component of the immune system. I can give you an example on how to block the complement system, how to clean the circulating antibodies from the human bodies to prevent the xeno-immune response, and also different potent agents acting on different targets, B or T cells or NK cells. That's the second big step and key innovations. And the third key innovation, and I'm maybe a little biased because I'm really into that, is integrated data, AI, and precision diagnostics. We need to use, and the access to new tools for restratification are mandatory to personalize the matching between the donor pigs and the recipients. We need to better understand the diseases that we see and the characterization of the immune response. So now with approaches like multiomics, single cell, and different, biomarkers like donor-derived cell-free DNA, you can detect the pig genome in a simple, blood harvested from the patients, which could be a good biomarker for pig-to-human for rejection in xenotransplantation. Together, I think this innovation will really push the xenotransplantation field. And of course, and we talked already about that, ethics, regulatory, how to make progress. And I'm fascinated now with the new ongoing clinical trials, which are about to start in the United States for, first of all, kidney xenotransplantation. The first included patients, and I think Bob Montgomery can talk about that, is underway and the clinical trials have been approved. It will be a very key moment to see how long we could push pig organs. How long will they last? And more importantly, is it good for patients' well-being, complications? Can these patients go back home and have a normal life? If you speak about Toana and its public information, which was the second candidate living person to xenotransplant, which lasted, I think, for 5.5 months, She said that those 5 months compared to dialysis was like a dream life for her. So I think we can provide hope. The road is a little bit long, and we know that in medicine and in science we need to be very careful. But I think that what has been achieved since 2021, again, will be one of the major breakthroughs of the 21st century in the medical field.
Yeah, and I mean, do you think that we'll be seeing xenotransplantation coming to Europe anytime soon?
That's the very key questions. We are working hard with the European Society of Organ Transplantation and different colleagues to, push xenotransplantation. So we first need to change the regulation, and we need also to make all these grant agencies invest and put money on the table for large collaborative European grants so that the EU can organize and build a xeno program, and also thinking about maybe collaboration with the United States. It's very important that we have had so much delays, and now we are kind of late in the competition, that we need to make the strategic partnerships between Europe, countries from Europe, and also with the United States, because they have been doing this now xenotransplantation for more than 4 years, and they have accumulated and experienced data. And this is how personally I work with the team in NYU. So it's a French-United States collaboration, and the Lancet landmark paper we're mentioning was, the consequence or the fruit of this very nice collaboration we have with the team of Bob Montgomery and all his amazing colleagues in the United States. So Xeno to perform, it's a team of like 100 people working on, science, organizations, supply chain, many actors working to make it like a reality. And I really would like to acknowledge all the people working on Xeno for improving patient lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think universally across medicine, we know that the key to success is collaboration, successful collaborations across, countries within different settings. So, it's such an interesting space to watch, because I think, often when you talk to people about xenotransplantation, it just feels like science fiction in some ways. And then when you break it down into its parts, you can see how I think I'm somebody that started off in quite a skeptical place about xenotransplantation. And, when we've had discussions in the journal, it's often felt like something that's been quite far off. But I think I'm definitely coming around to a place where perhaps I feel like more confident that actually things are going to move forward over the next few, it might be decades, but it seems like certainly we have made a huge amount of progress. So I think it's definitely a watch this space, and is something to be aware of within the general medical field.
And you are perfectly right. So 2 important points to me, and you mentioned collaboration. I think those strategic collaborations are key. And in, let's say, a complex political environment where every single country now try to work in silos, I think we need really, as scientists and as physicians, keep the collaborative networks, because we need each other. We need the experience gathered from the US brought to Europe. We need to make those connections. The point number 2 is about the journal. I'm very pleased. And if you look at the journal metrics, more general audience journal, they historically did not take a lot of papers on xenotransplantation. And now there are some papers which are published. And Lancet is a journal that publishes xenotransplant science in kidney and heart. There has been some very important papers. Why is it important? Because not only for the people to understand where the science is going, but also the precision diagnostic tool and the precision medicine tool. When we have imagined the connection between a foreign organ from different species to a human, can be broader and more generally to xenotransplantation, is the systemic nature of all the approach we are using to tackle the immune response, the immune system. It could serve as the basis, coming back to allotransplantation, immune disorders, immune-related neurological disorders, also to understand better the viral transmission. So all this array of research around xenotransplantation has the potential of having huge impact beyond the specialty. And there has been in the past many discoveries outside of transplantation which came from transplantation. So I guess that this is also from a journal perspective, something that we would like as a community to acknowledge the fact that Lancet is really interesting, is also pushing. And there has been the recent Lancet series, the 3 back-to-back papers published in the Lancet earlier in 2025. And there are chapters dedicated on xeno and what is the roadmap. I think those papers are very important. And if the auditors, they want to read those papers, I very encourage them to read no matter what their specialty are, because there has been a very source of inspiration around this specialty.
Absolutely. I mean, you've done a superb job of promoting the Lancet within the xenotransplantation and wider transplantation space, which I hugely appreciate, because it's definitely an area that we're very keen on and we're very interested in. We want that new research. And, you highlight a really important lesson, which, for all of us within medicine, that it's often about more than just within your own specialty. And it really highlights the importance of the meetings and things that we have, some of the big transplant meetings, they're not just for people who are specialists within transplant. You could be working within wider cardiology, within wider nephrology, within, immunology, and there's lots of lessons for us as a whole. So I think that's a really good note for us to finish on. But it's been absolutely wonderful having you chat with us and share your expert and insight into xenotransplantation. I'm sure we're going to have many more conversations about this going forward, but it's certainly very exciting.
Thank you very much, Chloe, and thank you to the Lancet editorial board for that and for the very kind invitation to exchange and share with you.
Thank you so much. And now I have roped in 2 of my fellow editors, Matt and Rebecca, to join me and have a bit more of a chat about xenotransplantation and what we think about it as editors. So would you like to introduce yourself for our listeners? Go ahead, Matt.
Thanks, Chloe. I'm Matt Gilbert, the North American Clinical Acquisitions and Outreach Editor based in New York, and I'm delighted to be here.
Thanks, Matt. And Rebecca?
And I am Rebecca. I am the European Senior Editor at the Lancet, and I'm also happy to be here.
Thank you so much. So a couple of things I wanted to ask you both about, because we are really interested in the topic of xenotransplantation, and it's brilliant and amazing to hear from experts. But I do think it's quite a difficult topic to wrap your head around, especially because it's something that has been going on for quite a long time. And I think from us as editors, it's often difficult to know exactly when those really big advances have happened. And I think that has become clearer over the last couple of years. I mean, I think the longest that anyone's had a xenotransplant was over 270 days now. It was the porcine kidney. So a really long time. And there have been these huge advances in what we've been able to do with xenotransplantation. But I think for us as editors, we're always a bit more, we temper our expectations as to what it means for the community. But I was just wondering, for either of you, and you jump in, have you seen any papers or any kind of news about xenotransplantation that's really caught your eye that you think that would be interesting for us to cover more on, or wish we'd got that paper?
Well, so I had the opportunity to attend the American Society of Nephrology's annual meeting earlier this year. And the big news there was of course, published in the New England Journal of Medicine study of that porcine kidney you just mentioned, that had been successfully transplanted into a living donor. And at the time, that had set a record, although I believe the patient in the paper has now been surpassed by another gentleman who had his pig kidney removed. I guess, is that 9 months? That sounds about right. Who just had his...
Yeah, I think so.
Excitingly, just due to declining function, no immunorejection, and no adverse effects to the patient beyond declining kidney function. And of course, so that was the big topic of debate, or the big news out of the conference, as well as the fact that this year, for the first time, the FDA has approved 2 clinical trials with porcine xenotransplantation. Both kidneys, or pig kidneys, have, I believe, 10 gene edits, as you mentioned, to reduce the chances of acute immunorejection, to silence some pig retroviruses, and to implant some human genes to increase the chances of, or rather facilitate a smoother acceptance and regulation of the organ once it's been implanted. And so that's the first time that these experiments are moving beyond compassionate use and to regulated trials. So we should have a much clearer picture in the coming months or years. I believe one of the trials has now successfully completed its second surgery and is aiming for an enrollment of 50 patients. The second trial, one is from United Therapeutics, one is from eGenesis, and the second is hoping to implant its first kidney in early January, I believe, of next year. So exciting stuff. And yeah, I was going to say, as you mentioned, the transplant folks are all, very, very optimistic. This is the, next near frontier. And, they're talking about functional cures to end-stage kidney disease for the first time, which, as you've mentioned, there are still lots of problems to overcome.
Yeah.
But exciting opportunities.
Oh, thanks, Matt. That's really good. I mean, that's a really important point, I think, because only until now we've only seen case studies. So I think it's going to be a really big next step moving into trials in that space. And not wanting to put you on the spot, Rebecca, but since I have you and you're based in Munich and in Europe, one of the things that came up when I was chatting with Alex, because most of these xenotransplantation studies are either happening in the US or in China. So we're not doing very much on that space in Europe. And he said it's around regulation. And that absolutely makes sense because there's lots of concerns about risk of transmission of zoonotic diseases and also the ethical considerations. Have you heard much about that, any of the meetings that you've been to in Europe?
So specifically on the regulatory aspect, I think one interesting aspect is that at the moment, the rules and the regulations around xenotransplantation is quite scattered. So I think there is definitely the need to, have a harmonized framework specifically for xenotransplantation. About the ethical aspect, one presentation that I found interesting was at the European Renal Association earlier this year and spring this year. And there was one lady from the Lund University who talked about the social aspects about the public perception of xenotransplantation. And what she said, she started her talk actually about cross-species ideas actually being highly rooted in culture and history. So we do have a very strong conception, I think, actually, on what we think about cross-species and ideas. So there's certainly that aspect of public perception, trust in these devices, in having very good regulations and policies in place to increase the trust in xenotransplantation. So I think that ethical aspect really needs to be considered going forward.
Yeah, definitely. 100% agree, because I do think it's a difficult area, isn't it? Especially with the cases so far, they've all been on compassionate use, whereas potentially the people who would maybe do best in a trial are those who actually could maybe wait and then get an allograft. So I think it is difficult ethical ground, but I agree with you that I think it's right that we think very carefully about it, but it is also a really exciting area. And I know all of the transplant specialists think that it could be the new frontier. So what I would say, and I don't know if you both agree, is I think we just need to watch this space and really try and stay ahead of the curve on what's going on and to understand what the latest innovations actually are and how they're different from the place where we were at, 30 years ago, for example. So thanks so much, both. I mean, is there anything else that you wanted to add or to chat about?
Just that I also saw recently that the first living pig liver to human transplant in China has been completed, and the patient, I think, is also past the 100-day mark.
Wow.
And this summer, I believe, the first pig, or maybe it was even sheep, lung to human transplant, but in another... I believe the patient was brain dead and it only lasted several days, but still, so there's lots of, in addition to the porcine or the kidney space, there's lots of exciting developments to keep our eyes on.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much, Matt. And anything else from you, Rebecca, that you wanted to say or add?
That was exactly what I wanted to say as well about, the other organs, that they're interesting FDA approved testings and trials ongoing. So I think we should definitely look out for all these trials.
Well, hopefully you've enjoyed listening to us muse a bit more about xenotransplantation, and to say that we are interested in that area, but it's a big area. There's a lot of different organs and there's a lot going on in that space, especially, with the immune system and the complicated aspects of it, not to mention, the regulation and ethical aspects.
Thanks for listening to the Lancet Pulse. If you enjoyed this show, leave a rating or a review on your favorite platform and subscribe to stay updated on our latest episode. The editorial team includes Chloe Wilson, Ben Abbott, Matthew Gilbert, and Jonathan Pimm. This show is part of the Lancet Group podcast offering, and it's produced by Matteo Simonetti. Thank you for being with us.